Well, welcome back to the State Line Collective Studios. My name is Craig Flack, and I'm here with
Steve Harris.
And we are Exceptionally
Average.
We are the Exceptionally Average podcast. This is month number 2. We are going to try and make these a little bit more regular. I've said that before. Sometimes life comes up. That's okay. They are not paying anything for this. So, but we're going to try and do about a monthly show. We feel like 12 episodes a year is something we can produce with that adds value to the person's life. How you doing, Steve?
Doing really well. So starting to get into more of a routine with getting back into it, you and me, and starting to schedule some things and looking forward to the summer, man.
Yep. And Steve will be jet setting again. We talked a little bit about that in our last episode. If you haven't listened to that on Passion versus Purpose, jump back last month and listen to that. And then go back and listen to, we had several episodes. We were just talking about our one of Don't Be a Victim. People have liked that. It was maybe a little bit, I don't want to say edgy. It wasn't edgy, but it was more maybe a bit punchier.
We went to the limits more than what we have in the past.
Yeah, and so people seem to be responding to that. And so if you're still listening, you've probably taken up that. And the reason I bring up that episode, the Don't Be a Victim, is this episode is going to kind of go in that, because my challenge for our listeners today is going to be to listen to your critic.
I'm already uncomfortable.
I know. Listen to your critic. Now, Steve, you and I were talking about what we had, and the way we've kind of done these
is this an intervention, by the way?
Your critic is here.
Yes.
There is the you take an episode, I take an episode, and we just kind of go back and forth, and we talk about what God's kind of stirring in our heart, what we're kind of thinking about, and what we feel like would add value to the listeners. And I text you this, and I think you were a little bit confused.
Right.
What comes to mind when I say listen to your critic? Good, bad, otherwise. What comes to mind when I say we need to be people that listen to our critic?
Well, when I think of critic, I think of the word critical, and people who are critical. And people who are critical of me, I look at them as kind of a crazy person. Because
and why?
Because why would anybody criticize me? I do everything so well. And I verify that with my home life, and my wife, she tells me all the things I do well, just like your wife does. Why wouldn't that happen? So I think of people who are critical of me and are coming from
They're
a place.
crazy.
Yeah, I know that they make no sense, but they're also coming from a place of meanness.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? Where they're trying to be hurtful and not helpful. And there's a difference between the two. So when I think of critic, I think of criticizing, and that is and can be very demoralizing. Am I right? Am I on the right track here?
I think so.
I have been on the wrong track with this conversation up until this point.
And the reason is because that's why I ask you this, because it was interesting to me, because when we were talking about it, there was almost not defensiveness in like
yes, there
spirit,
was,
but like a defense of like, wait, why would I listen to? I shouldn't listen to my critic. So I had to convince you, which I think I did.
Where Craig was wrong.
Yeah. Because we immediately think of critic and we think of someone who's rude, someone who's antagonistic. They're not right. They're self-motivated. I'm perfect.
There's something behind it.
My mom's special little boy.
Right.
And I would never make a mistake. And so we really struggle with this idea of critic. Now, let's be honest. When I say listen to your critic, I'm not just saying think back, and we'll talk about this a little later. I want to ask Steve some of his thoughts. Think back on that really hard coach who was actually meaning best for you, but you thought he was being critical. I am talking about listening to them, but also listening to the jerk. Also listening to the person that doesn't see you fairly. Also doesn't maybe not be the most polite person.
That you're not friends with.
That you're not friends with. That you wouldn't want to go have a beer with. The old have a beer with test. So I am saying listen to even that critic. And so now let's unpack that.
I don't like that.
Steve, let me ask you this. Do you always see yourself clearly? And I don't mean in the mirror after you've done some lunges.
I know.
You love the gym mirrors.
I know. No, I don't. There are no gym mirrors.
Are there not?
No, there's none, and it's intentional, and nobody wants that. No.
Is it because we look goofy doing things?
No, it's because the people who want gym mirrors are the ones that are there for the wrong reasons.
Good to know.
So no, that would never, ever, ever be the case, especially with me.
But do you see yourself clearly?
You know, it's an interesting question, and if I were to answer this honestly in a very private setting where there's nobody watching, I would have to tell you that I don't always have a clear perspective of myself. I have blind spots.
There you go.
Okay, that others see, but I do not see because of how I maybe manipulate reasoning.
Yeah.
Okay, am I? And so I would say that I'm not always very clear on myself. I like to think that I have a very high emotional intelligence, but it's also from a very internal perspective.
Now, let me ask you this, though. You're 58, 59, 62.
Why are you
75.
saying this? Now this is about critical, and now I'm getting testy.
You're 51?
We'll start there. I am 53.
53. If I asked 25-year-old Steve, my gut says, if I said to 25-year-old Steve, do you see yourself clearly? You probably would have said, yeah, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because I was just coming out of college, had a career path in mind.
You had it figured
out. My future was looking bright. Like, yeah, I've got it all figured out, Craig. What do you want to know?
The reason I say that is because it's taken 53 years of wisdom, of reflection, not to just simply admit, I probably don't see myself perfectly. I have blind spots. I have errors. I have faults that I don't see clearly. Mm-hmm. There's a maturity to just admitting, to not even coming to them, to just admitting I have blind spots. There will be people listening that are like, blind spots? Who has blind spots? If I had blind spots, I'd discover them. I would look. So, okay, so that's question one. Let me just set that up. We maybe don't see ourselves clearly. Why should we listen to our critic? Maybe we don't see ourselves clearly. Okay, so who do you talk to every single day? Who do you see every single day?
My wife.
Okay, your wife is lovely. Jill, she's a smart woman. She's smarter than you and I. She's sharp. She's organized. She's detailed. Do you think Jill sees you perfectly? Or are there times where maybe even after 20 plus years of marriage, 2 kids, and a lot of love and devotion, that maybe even Jill can come to you with some rose-colored glasses about Steve Harris?
I think so, because I am a reflection of her, and she does not want that reflected back on her negatively. So
that's really, I hadn't thought of that.
It is her and your wife, and anybody who is a spouse does not want to be reflected negatively by their husband or their wife. So they're going to align them in probably a more positive light.
And maybe overlook some things.
Right.
You know, that's funny you say that, and we didn't talk about this, but one time my wife said, let me iron that shirt. I don't want the church ladies to see you like that because they're going to blame me. And I was like, huh? But she thinks letting your husband go out, and Jill would probably say the same, looking like a schmuck.
Oh, I got a story.
It will reflect on her. What's your...
So, you know, we do these, maybe a Christmas carry-in each year, right? Mm-hmm. And so I can cook on a grill, mm-hmm. but we're not going to cook it on a grill at work in the middle of December, yep. right? So ultimately, my wife, who is a very good baker, prepares things for like very quick and ready food kind of stuff and many other things, says, okay, I'm going to do this for you. And here's what we're going to do. She doesn't say, what do you want? She goes, here's what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And I get this very pretty, maybe a dish, maybe in a crock pot, or mm-hmm. maybe it's a cookie or some kind of a mm-hmm. snack sample that looks absolutely stunning and beautiful that you would buy off of out of a magazine. Mm-hmm. And I take that and I present that. And then people say, Steve, this is such a great dish that you brought. One of the things that she does really well is this taco salad. Mm-hmm. And people raved about it, and the dish that is a big bowl comes back empty. Well, Jill looks at that as a success on her because what she has provided makes me look good, and mm-hmm. if I look good, then she looks good as a result. So it's a combination of things. Yeah.
So it's funny we flesh that out because that is absolutely true. So now we know we have blind spots that we can't see. Mm-hmm. Our spouse probably looks at us maybe through some rose-colored glasses.
Sure.
Doesn't want, we don't necessarily want to see the worst in our spouse, or maybe even won't bring it to us because, hey, we want to keep the peace.
Right.
So there are times our spouse does see things and they go, you know what, I'm not dealing with that. We've both had times where I guarantee our wife has thought, that's for a brother in the church to address. I'm not even touching that with a 10-foot pole with him.
Our spouses will also defend us to a certain degree in public, right?
Yeah.
In front of others.
Which is appropriate.
But then when we get home, it's like, hey, Steve, look.
Yeah. And you go, no, I don't want to look. And so we've got these people, the people we love most maybe don't see us properly or willing to communicate that all the time. We certainly don't see ourselves. So here's the question, Steve. Where are you going to learn where you need to grow?
Well, it's not going to be from the people who are blowing smoke up your butt, right?
Yeah. Now, you could answer, well, I have a very good boss. They're going to help me see that. Maybe. You could answer, I've got some dear friends. And frankly, I do have some dear friends. You and I have been iron sharpens iron. We've helped each other. But what if you listen to your critic?
Yeah, that is a very humbling thought, first of all. And to be able to humble yourself and be able to listen to that and not be a deflector shield.
Mm-hmm. So have I convinced you now, because again, you were kind of wrestling with this,
I know,
that maybe there's some value in listening to your critic?
I don't like it, but I think you might be
Fair
right.
enough. And so I want to know, so now I say, listen to your critic, and people, and naturally,
right?
I'm not listening to my critic. Why would it? Well, because we don't necessarily see ourselves clearly. Those around us maybe don't see us clearly or aren't necessarily willing to talk to us. Mm-hmm. And one thing too, if once you get married more than 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, you create weird systems with your partner, like where you're weird together, and you don't know. You know how when you leave on vacation and you come home and your house smells, and you're like, wait, does our house smell like this all the time?
Right.
Oh my gosh, do we have a smelly house?
Right.
But when you're there day to day, you don't notice it.
Exactly.
There's some patterns of
You
behavior.
just don't want to be the cat house.
Amen. And so
I've just offended a few people,
so
we've lost some listeners.
Cats are from Satan, so that's biblical. It's not, but I think it should have been. So we know that we have blind spots that maybe our critic can point out. So I want to shift gears because we've maybe convinced him. What are some things that we could potentially gain? And I think if we listen to our critics, because there better be value. We shouldn't just listen to them because they're mean and they make us feel bad.
Right.
But I think the first thing that we actually gain by listening to our critics is what a lot of us need a ton of: humility.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to be able to humble yourself, and not just before the Lord, but before people who are criticizing.
Why do you think it's so difficult to listen to your critic?
Oh boy. Well,
at least why does it strike you? Okay, so I'll give you a scenario because it might be easier to flesh it out this way. We all have people we work with. I don't, because I have great staff, but like in the secular world, that just they criticize you. You chafe against one another. They take your parking spot, you use their coffee creamer, that kind of thing. The classic workplace nonsense. They come up to you, give you critical feedback, maybe criticize you. Why it comes up in you that doesn't want to listen to that? Why do you struggle with humility in that moment?
I don't know that I have a good answer for that, but I can tell you this. Just you mentioning that, although I can't even think of a scenario right now, it makes me kind of turtle up. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It makes me kind of curl up and kind of put up some deflector shields. Like, why would this person be approaching me? What was the trigger, the tipping point that caused them to have to come to me as a result of that? But for me personally, let's see, if I were to say, you're asking me, why is it so difficult
to respond with humility? Because
it's self-reflection, and nobody likes to self-reflect. And then I would also make the statement, Craig, that I think people don't mind change, but they don't want to be changed.
Yeah.
And people are coming to us asking us to change something, a behavior, an action, a thought. And we don't want to do that when others are driving it. We want to come to that conclusion on our own. And if we can't do that, then deflector shields go up.
Yeah. I think humility is, if you start actively being able to listen to your critic, it will humble you, because you have to say, this person that I want to dismiss for all maybe right reasons might actually have something to say. Mm-hmm. That's humbling. The fact that they might actually have a point and that you're not perfect.
Well, nobody wants to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be wrong.
I told my wife one time, I know I'm not wrong because if I was wrong, I'd change my mind.
Yes.
Didn't win the argument, folks.
No, it didn't go well.
It's logical, right? Because no one wants to be wrong. So if I was wrong, I'd change my mind. So, sweetie, I know I'm right because if I was wrong, I would simply change my mind.
Exactly.
Which is insane, but that's how we actually behave. So listening to your critic brings humility into your life. I have never found an area of my life that is not better served with humility. If I don't care if you lead a Fortune 500 company, you are better to do it with humility. Mm-hmm. I don't care if you're sweeping the floors. You're better to do it with humility. I don't care if you're cleaning toilets or giving a sermon or leading a sales seminar or dealing with a flight agent, a flight attendant, or dealing with a waitress. You're better to do it with humility. Humility simply says, I don't know what they're going through this day. They might have experiences that I don't know about. The homeless guy might have situations that I don't fully understand. I look at him and think, man, McDonald's is hiring right down the street. Get a job, you bum. Versus, hey, that they have mental illness that I don't fully get. They had an addiction that I don't fully understand. Mm-hmm. Every area of our life is better with humility, but humility is something that you grow in. You don't just decide to be humble. So listening to your critic can actually grow you in humility, which you then can apply in a lot of other areas.
Let me ask you a question. I want to make a clear definition of humility. Can you provide that for us?
I think it is willing to admit that you don't have all the answers and that you're not too good for it. Like there's a humbling of oneself as I'm not perfect in this way. I don't have all the answers. I might not know everything in this. So I'm going to be lowly in how I receive this. I'm going to listen and be open to it. A humble person is open to the situation.
It takes a very mature individual to be able to sit back and be humble because you are trying to discern from or separate the critical from the critique.
Yep.
Right?
Well, and so you have to be comfortable in who God has called you to be.
Mm-hmm.
If I come to you and say, Steve, I got some issues with you, and I think I need to talk with you. If you know I'm a child of God, Craig loves me, he's going to talk with me, and I know I'm not perfect. If I asked you, Steve, are you perfect? No. And then I said, okay, good. I want to talk to you about some of the things you're not perfect in. It's like, ugh! So we all admit we're not perfect. Mm-hmm. So if you simply own it and then believe I'm not perfect, you can respond with humility. And so when people have come to me, and I have 300 bosses every single Sunday that listen to my sermon and pay my salary and have a membership here and have a strong opinion on how I do my job at times. And I can either say, I'm a pastor, I went to seminary, I know about versus, yeah, you know what, you might be right in that.
Right.
I hadn't considered it that way. And there is an opportunity to grow in that says, I was a redeemed sinner before, I'm a redeemed sinner after. Their opinion doesn't change God's opinion of me. And so I can listen to them, and it doesn't have to change who I am.
You don't have to experience loss. It's not a scoreboard, right? When you're listening to a critic or somebody who is being critical of you, there is no devalue of self. You actually place that on yourself.
Correct.
That's not them doing it to you. It is you doing it to yourself.
Mm-hmm. And they can't take what you don't give them.
That's exactly
right.
So
if you don't let them, they might, sometimes critics are awful and they might come to try to knock you down. They can only knock you down if you give that to them.
You know what I also know, and this is more from a scientific perspective, is when we receive information, it comes in through the back of our head. If you don't know that, it passes through the amygdala, which is the emotional part of our brain. Every thought passes through there. It gets deciphered, evaluated. And if it does not pass through there effectively and get to the frontal lobe, then you are going to react probably in a very negative manner.
That's why kids don't actually thrive when you scream at them.
Right. Because
it's really hard because we want to scream at them, don't do that.
Right.
And then they don't take it because they shut down because they're brain doesn't let him, versus, hey, let me talk to you about why that was a really bad idea.
So when we talk about that emotional intelligence and in the development of the brain at age now, what I think they say is 24, 25 years old, that's exactly what they're talking about. But it is, and I say that because I go back to, again, to say you said it is a developmental process, and it has to be something very intentional that you work on and you practice, because you don't just have it or not have it. It's not one of those things. It's not like you're athletic or you're not athletic.
I think there's things you can do if you struggle with humility. There's things you can do to humble yourself. So you want to be humble? Clean your house for the next month and don't take a victory lap. Do scrub the floors, clean the toilets, scrub the tub, vacuum the carpets, and some of you are like, I already do that. But if you don't, so do the chores that you don't normally do, and then don't take a victory lap. Don't look for a pat on the back. Don't just say, this is my way to contribute. That is humbling.
Yeah.
Because you want someone to say, hey, well done, good job.
You want that recognition.
You want the recognition. It is humbling to say, or it is humbling to ask your spouse or significant other or someone better, hey, can you show me how to do this better? And so there are ways, but okay, so I want to move us forward. We can gain humility. The next thing I think we can gain is a new perspective. What if your critic just sees things in a different way? All of us know that we work with people or interact with people that see the world differently. And that can be very challenging because they see the world differently. But what if we didn't look at it as only a challenge or an obstacle, but we looked at it as an opportunity to see the thing differently? So I had a friend of mine, he's not dead. I have a friend of mine. He's a constant contrarian. Constant. I'm convinced if I just said, beautiful day outside, this guy might say, I don't know, it's kind of cruddy out. Just to do it. And he is constantly, I've called him a raptor before, because you remember in Jurassic Park where the raptors test the fences?
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, dude, you just test the fences just to see. Like, you just do it. And he's like, yeah, I know.
There's a sign on it that says danger, but you're going to touch it anyway.
But he has helped me see the other side of multiple issues.
So give me a situation then where you have experienced that critic, and you did not necessarily like it. You didn't receive it well. It was not something that was anticipated, and it maybe came out of the clear blue, but after a period of time, after you got through that anger part of it or that disappointment, you're like, okay, I can see that.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of that?
Oh, yeah. For specifically a new perspective. So someone approached me during COVID, and they said, and they weren't a critic in a mean spirit, but they were critical of what I was doing. So they were actually very kind.
Was it me?
No.
Okay.
It was an elder at the church, and I was posting at that point in COVID. I was getting very frustrated with our government.
Okay.
And I have very libertarian streaks within me. I value personal freedom and I value personal responsibility, and the government became a nanny state during COVID. In 2023, most of what I said would be like, ding, 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 dude was dead on. But at the time, it was being received as, you don't care about grandma, you want grandma to die, you're going to run grandma over with a tank, what do you care? You need to respect rulers and authorities. How dare you speak of Emperor
Wear your mask outside.
Wear your mask, 5 masks just to be sure. And so I had posted some things that one person actually called libertarian rantings or whatever. And gentleman came to me, and a guy in our church, and he said, Craig, I'm just not sure that you see how this is playing with another side. He talked me through it. And my first response was, I don't really care. It's my own social media. Right. If they don't like it, they can pound sand.
Yeah.
They don't have to engage. It's literally Facebook. Everyone gets to post whatever they want on Facebook. That's the reason it's a dumpster fire. I'm going to add to the fuel. And what the government is doing is wrong, and I have a passion about this kind of thing. So I didn't delete it. And he said, do what you want. I'm just telling you, I'm worried and concerned how this reflects on Christ. I'm worried and concerned how this reflects on the church. And I don't actually think you see. He's trying to offer me a new perspective. That you have a blind spot here. And it took about a day or two. And eventually it was like the crap. He's dead on. And it was like the blinders fell off. And that moment in 2020 completely changed how I engage social media. From that day, 3 years later, to where I rarely, and you're my friend, I rarely post about
I would agree with
politics
that
anymore. I rarely touch third rails anymore. I post majority family, church, gospel. Because I just became shown you have a pretty big megaphone on here. Don't squander it. And it came critically, and I had to reflect on that, but it was this new perspective that he gave me, and it changed completely. And I've talked with him since then. I'm like, hey, I've thanked him. I'm like, you completely changed the way I handle social media. And by the way, it's a far more enjoyable experience because I'm not throwing fist fights in the mean streets of Facebook, which are worthless. But so he came to me in that, and again, he came very kind. I had someone at that same time, and I didn't follow my own advice, who came to me privately, but came as a jerk and came as arrogant, and I basically told to get off my lawn. He came at me about the same stuff because, again, I was posting pretty regularly about COVID stuff and my frustrations and government shutdowns and government ineptitude and bailouts and whatever. And so I failed in the one sense of listening to my critic that came very critical, but I listened to my critic in the sense of, have you ever had that coach or that teacher that was hard on you, that you at the time were like, man, that guy's a jerk. That girl's a jerk. And then you look back and you think, man, they loved me. They cared about me.
Yeah.
They were a critic. They said, you're not perfect and you're failing in this way. Yep. But it took me days to come to that, but it completely changed. So I can trace back my social media behavior to the point where I've had friends ask me, why don't you ever post anything anymore? Like, you never ran about the government anymore. You never post random stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I don't do that anymore.
Did you ever go back to that individual and tell them how that impacted? And how was that received?
Very humbly, like, we're all sinners. God just, I've failed, and you've helped me as your pastor and as my pastor, and we just need to walk towards it together.
I have a similar...
Which is probably why I was able to accept it from him, because this person was gentle and kind and came to me in private. They didn't do it publicly. They didn't shame me. But it was harsh. I mean, they didn't pull punches either. They're like, you're failing. Like, you're, as a pastor, you're missing an opportunity here, and you don't see this. And I'm like, but yeah, so I go to thank them, and they're like, hey, I love you. It's like, thanks, man.
Yeah. I have a similar story. When I was probably 20 years old, I was a basketball official in the state of Michigan and the state of Ohio. And I was an early bloomer where I was fortunate enough to do varsity basketball at a very early age that was contrary to what was a traditional route for most people who don't break into that for a long period of time. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not based a whole lot on talent as much as it is politics. Don't let anybody fool you. However, I remember going to a game. I was at Bedford High School in Temperance, Michigan, and I was sitting in the stands, and I was watching a JV game as you prepare and you kind of wait for halftime. And at halftime, the varsity officials traditionally go in, start to get ready, stretch out, and go through their game plan, how that's going to work. I was sitting in the stands, and the league coordinator, commissioner at the time, came down, and he came up and he sat next to me, and I knew the guy, and I liked the guy. I respected the guy. And he sat down, and he said, Steve, I want to have a talk with you. And, that never starts off really good.
Yeah, you're immediately like, I don't.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to know if I want to listen to this. And his conversation was, I'm happy to have you in the league, and I want to keep having you do games and so forth. He said, there's a conversation that I think is a little bit difficult that I just want to offer you some advice. And he said, take it however you like to. He said, but I've noticed a change in you as far as not just your competence, which is growing, but also a level of overconfidence. And that level of overconfidence, and I think he wanted to say arrogance and just didn't. That level of overconfidence is spilling out of you, and it is affecting the kids on the floor. it's affecting the coaches on the sideline. And at times I've seen where it can be enticing to the fans.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just warning me to kind of throttle that back a little bit. And I looked at him like, dude, I'm 20 years old. I'm already doing varsity basketball games. I know the rule book as well or better than anybody, especially the old guys who are just going through the motions. And you're sitting here talking to me about how to.
I could have your job.
Yeah, and I will have your job when I'm older if I want it. But I don't think I do. that was my level of arrogance.
That's an amazingly arrogant. I love that.
And that's
I can do your job. I don't want to, but you're lucky.
That's right. And so that's what I thought. That's not what I said, but that was going through my head.
Yeah, you probably choked out. I'm like, thanks, man. Yeah, I'll think about that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. It caught me off guard, and I'm like, yeah, well, thanks. I appreciate that. But I knew immediately I was going to dismiss it, and he kind of sat there in kind of this awkward state as we just kind of sat in silence watching the rest of the first half. And then we kind of broke it out. Okay, hey, see you later. Thanks a lot. Appreciate the conversation. And I was just angry. It distracted my focus away from the upcoming game. I go into the locker room and I'm frustrated, like, gosh, how dare he? How could he do that to me? Does he know who I am? Kind of thing, And you're 20 years old, you think you know everything, right? And I'll tell you what, much like what you just shared, I didn't like it. In fact, I hated it. I was angry about it for a long time, but it also caused me to refocus. And the more days that passed and the more games that I did following that moment, the more I began to level out into that individual that he was describing that I should be.
Which would be a competent official.
A very competent official, a confident official at that, but also one that is, we mentioned the word humble, and can listen to a coach who is angry and upset. And trust me, I have had a lot of those tell me all kinds of things about me and my family and things that they've never even experienced with me before. And, you sit back and you learn to take it and digest it for what it is. You say, okay, what can I glean from this? And I have to tell you, Craig, I feel like I became a more competent official, even took me to another level beyond what I ever would have become had I not heard that conversation. Now, I didn't get the opportunity to circle back with him, but I remember that moment.
Yeah.
And it was impactful.
And that's why the last thing I think we can gain is improvement. So we can have a humility. We can get a new perspective. If we listen to our critic, we get humility. We get a new perspective. But then we can actually get improvement.
Yeah.
And that's really a lot of what Exceptionally Average is about is men and women improving in their life and growing and not being, comfortable with average. Want to be exceptionally average,
right.
And so we can improve if we're willing to listen to our critic. And that's really what I wanted to challenge people with. I as I was thinking about this topic, I had this thought and this idea that truth is truth no matter the vehicle it comes in. So if someone comes to you that you love, and if our wife comes to us and says, sweetie, and we've had this, you're out at a dinner party, you put your foot in your mouth, your wife doesn't say anything in public, but you get home and she goes, sweetie, I don't know. And you go, yeah, I know, I'm sorry. And she's being critical, but it's easier and you grow. But sometimes it comes from that guy at work, like, you're an idiot and you don't see this clearly and you're dumb and you never even considered this and you only have this position because of politics and you only have this, this, and this. And you could still grow if that person brings the truth. It can be your sweet and dear grandma. It can be your sweet and dear mama. It can be your sweet and dear wife or your husband or your coworker. Or it can be the jerk that you really don't like, but if they bring truth, it's still truth. And truth can help you grow and progress as a human. And so that's my challenge to people. Listen to your critic. And I'm not saying this is someone who doesn't have them. I'm not saying this is someone who says, just be the person they say you are. You don't have to take on the negative. If they say you're worthless, you're not worthless. If they say you're stupid, you're not stupid. But if they say you need to grow in this, you might. Mm-hmm. And so know who you are, know who God has called you to be, know who God has said you to be. Go back and listen to our passion and purpose, know your purpose, and know who you are. But then when you know that, when you know rock solid who you are, that they can't take that from you, you can listen with humility to anyone, the shopkeeper, the custodian, the president, whoever, and say, yeah, I can grow from that. I can learn from anyone. And they might not always present it the best way, but you never know what that person's going to teach you. So my challenge to our listeners, listen to your critic. Did I convince you?
You did, as a matter of fact. Yeah, I never really looked at it that way. I don't like to look at it that way. It doesn't mean it's easy.
No.
You're not telling people that it's easy and it's just going to flow for you.
I'm saying that the gain is worth the pain.
If you dive into it and you decipher it, you peel it back, you might get something from it. Mm-hmm. There might be a pearl inside.
Yeah, and it's not going to be easy, but pretty much this entire podcast is based around doing,
hard things.
I think we've literally had an episode on do hard
yes,
things.
Go back and listen to that. That's a good one. Go back and listen to doing hard things.
So this is
part of it.
This is a hard thing, to listen to people that are critical of you and criticize you, but there's something to be gained from it. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up here?
No, looking forward to the next one. It's going to be a great summer, man.
I'm looking forward to criticizing you the rest of the summer, and now you have to listen to me.
I can't wait.
We'll see you guys.